We've got some tough competition. We've got a great product. But man, there's going to be some tough days. There's going to be some tough quarters. So you better be all in for the mission, or there's going to be a Tuesday where you're like, oh, this is just too hard. And if you're not really after that success factor, know what it is and want to work together as a team, then it's not the right place for you.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Human Element. Today I'm speaking with Caleb Barlow, Chief Executive Officer of Cyberbit. Caleb, thanks for joining me today.
Hey Ben, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you, man?
Not too bad.
All right, so let's dive in. Tell me about some key events in your life that have significantly shaped your leadership style.
I think one of the things that's really interesting for anybody that does any type of incident response or threat intelligence work, right, is, you've got to have this kind of inquisitive skill, but, you've also got to you got to kind of like working in crisis decision-making, right? Where, now I don't mean in crisis decision-making like the world is always coming to an end, but what I mean are making decisions when, you've got limited data, maybe there's big consequence to the decisions, and it's okay to be wrong. It's not okay not to make a decision, right? So for me, that really came early in my career. I put myself through college as an EMT and firefighter. And, has nothing to do with cybersecurity, but it has everything to do with learning this kind of leadership motion of making decisions with limited data, decisions that have consequence, and frankly, being willing to change your decision if in the light of new evidence, you realize you made a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to have handled those moments of crisis and know how you react to it and know how to.
And I think the big thing you see in cybersecurity is, in fact, I would go so far, Ben, as to say the lackluster decision-making by executive teams during a breach often causes more damage than the threat actor, right?
Oh, sure.
You got to be comfortable in this mode where, okay, maybe we don't know the answer, but let me make a decision now based on what limited data I have, and then maybe we'll update that decision tomorrow.
Yeah. You're always going to get more information. You're always going to have opportunities to tune the decision, but it's a good one. So what non-technical skill has had the most impact on your career?
That's a tough one. I think, honestly, probably communication skills. I mean, it's an easy thing to say, but I'm telling you, in fact, just last week, I was spending a bunch of time talking to an MBA class, and they were really surprised to hear that. I'm like, and here's the point, right? Like, you and I have both had careers where we've made bold bets. We've tried to get people to invest in different things. If you can't communicate your opinion, it's not going anywhere, right? And I think that's just so critical in today's world of being able to communicate effectively, concisely, and with a high degree of precision.
Definitely. Super important. So tell me about an individual who unexpectedly altered the trajectory for you.
Well, I think for me, it was an individual and it was a moment, right? Like, this is a story I love to tell because it's totally true. I was with a team that we were investigating a really brutal breach. This threat actor completely owned a company. I mean, upside down, backwards and forwards. And, the basic setup here is we get on the call. It's time to tell the company what actually happened. And hey, look, here's the deal. They're everywhere. You need to take the following actions right now. And we go through the whole process. And at the end of it, the CISO turns to me and says, well, hey, this was really helpful. Can you put this in a PowerPoint? I'm like, what? You want a what? You want a PowerPoint? Like, we gotta go, man. We don't have time to build charts. And this individual says to me, well, it's for the executive team meeting next Thursday when we discuss the important issues. And I want to make sure this gets on the agenda.
Whoa.
And I was like, whoa, exactly. It was this moment. And this is, by the way, a Fortune 100 company. This was one of those moments where I was like, holy cow, Batman, like, we are not, back to communication.
One of us does not understand this problem.
One of us is not communicating or listening properly on what's going on. And it totally changed the trajectory of my career because, I really kind of changed from that moment of going, okay, there's got to be a better way to educate executives, in this case, a CISO, on what are they really up against. And that led to me building kind of the first commercial cyber range to say, look, there's got to be a better way, because I can't have another call like this ever.
That's staggering.
Yeah, it really is mind-boggling. But I mean, these are the kinds of things that happen.
So, all right, tell me more about how that cyber range solves that. What are your
Well, I mean, I think, look, if you look at any career or even better yet, a sport that, these things are experiential learning, right? Like, okay, let's take a team-based sport, maybe soccer or football as an example, right? You're up against a human adversary. Well, in cybersecurity, you're up against a human adversary. In order to get good at it, like, I mean, I could give you a whole book on American football. You could read it front to back. You could learn all the plays. I throw you out on a field for the first time. You're going to get clobbered if you've never played before. Why? Because those skills aren't muscle memory. But the second thing is that you need pattern recognition, right? Half of playing one of these games is, if you're on defense, trying to figure out what the offense is likely to do, what play is coming up next, knowing where to be to anticipate. Well, it isn't any different than cybersecurity, right? I mean, you have to constantly be asking yourself, what is the likely next move of the adversary? And what's their potentially worst move? And those are the two things you plan for. Well, again, that isn't any different than a sport. So the big thing you get out of a cyber range, whether they're talking about technical exercises or executive exercises, is repetition. I mean, literally, it's just like going to the gym and working out. You need constant reps in order to get any good at this stuff. Case in point, last Friday, we build this stuff for a living. Every now and then we should go use it. So myself and a couple of members of our executive team, we went and did a live fire exercise, right? And, on one hand, I was feeling pretty good. Like we had gone through, we'd figured out what the adversary was, we'd figured out their lateral movement. I mean, these exercises take like 4 hours, right?
Mhm.
So we're at hour 3. I'm feeling pretty good. And, we were running out of time. So we had to wrap it up. And I'm like, all right, well, let's just look at the answer key just to see if we missed anything. Oh, man. Then we looked at the answer key. We're feeling like morons. Like, a couple of blatantly obvious things that we just completely missed. Like, in my case, there was a basic script that was rerunning on a timer to go and, wipe the logs clean. And I completely missed it. And I'm sitting there going, oh, you're such a moron. Like, this stuff. How did you not check that? And again, it's just like a sport. It's through repetition. And I can guarantee you, with all the crap I got from my team after that, I will never forget to not check the scheduled tasks again.
That's awesome. I've been saying a lot that experience comes not from years, but from seconds. Those moments when things hit the fan and you've gotta actually.
Well, honestly, here's the other aspect. Again, just like a team sport, like you do it with your team.
Yeah.
You screw up, you're going to catch some flack, right? Like, okay, I mean, we had a great time. We all learned a bunch, but man, I'm not going to forget to check my scheduled tasks again.
Nope, bet not. All right. So what's the most valuable lesson you've learned from a security incident or operational failure?
I think that time matters and that sometimes getting to the answer isn't the most important thing. Sometimes you've got to look at the business aspect. This great breach that was, I don't know, probably 5-10 years ago, and it was a national television network, and they go down. And my team is all like, oh, well, look, we found the malware. We're going to detonate it. Here's what group it comes from. It's like, dude, they can't broadcast.
They just want to be on the air.
They just need to be on the air. It doesn't freaking matter right now who done it, how it happened. Just get them broadcasting and we'll go figure out the rest later. And we were able to do that, right? But I mean, I think those are some of the things that are just so critical, is really boiling this back to what actually matters. I mean, another good example of this, how many times have you seen a penetration testing report that's like, oh, Ben, there's this brutal vulnerability on this unpatched system. The world is going to come to an end if you don't patch it immediately. Okay, and then you find out it's like some internal system buried behind 3 firewalls that holds the cafeteria menu. Like, who freaking cares? And I think sometimes, I mean, don't get me wrong, it should still be patched, right? Sure. But sometimes this is the important thing, is just like getting the context.
So time and context. Sounds good. All right. So how is your approach to building trust within your teams evolved?
Oh, yeah, this is really interesting. I think COVID changed everything. First of all, like, okay, I don't care what anybody says about back to the office. The reality is everybody's remote. And if you're in an office, you're just on a Zoom meeting with people that aren't in the office, right? So the part of the challenge is, like, when you spend 8 hours a day on a screen like we are, the part you miss is, how's it going? What's going on? If when you're in the office and you see somebody around the water cooler and you can tell they're down and something's happening, like it might be something in their personal life, it might be a medical issue, like you've got the opportunity to connect. I mean, one of the things I learned in COVID is, all of a sudden somebody's like on an idle Tuesday, hey man, I found another job. You're like, whoa, where did this come from? Like I didn't even know there was an issue. So I think that this need to stay connected and, it's okay to spend the first couple minutes on a call like, "Hey, what you up to? How's it
Yep.
going?" Hearing from a stupid story of what happened on the weekend from a colleague. So one of the things I started in COVID that I don't know, I mean, COVID kind of brought it out, but now it's just part of my management philosophy. I meet with my team every single day. We scrum every single day. And it's 30 minutes. We kind of sometimes have an agenda. A lot of times there might be a project we're working on, but it's an opportunity to find out what's going on. Where are the issues? But here's the things that evolve from it. One, there's never an excuse for I didn't know because everybody got together every single day. There's never an excuse for like, so-and-so said A and so-and-so said B and we couldn't work it out because, again, we're all on the
Yep.
same call together every single day. But the other thing is, I would say 20% of the time, we just talk. Like
Mhm.
20% of the time, we're not getting anything done. And that's okay because the other 80% of the time, we're getting a ton done. And during that 20%, we're catching up on what's going on. And it might be like somebody's got some issue going on or something that happened over the weekend. Like it's super important to have those connections with your colleagues. And I think that's something that people just forget about all the time.
That definitely resonates. We had a very similar experience during COVID where, my team at the time, engineering team, we had a daily stand up. It wasn't functional. It was get everybody on a call, show me you're alive. I had a bunch of people remote and alone. It's like, prove to me that you are okay.
Yep.
I don't care what you're wearing. I don't care what your hair looks like. Show me you're okay.
And look, I think some of that should continue. And the reality of what you get out of it is, I think you get healthier teams. I mean,
Yep.
don't get me wrong, you still have the occasional dust up, but the dust up can only last 24 hours because by the next stand up, it's got to get resolved.
Yep, exactly. All right. How do you balance technical expertise and people skills towards being a leader?
I think for most people, those are mutually exclusive. And
Many-
hey, look, I'll be the first to admit, like, my upbringing is as an engineer. People skills are probably not the strongest component, but I have to work at it, right? I think this is a critical balance. You can be the most technical person on the planet, but if you're somebody that people don't want to follow, don't get along with, or can't communicate, then you're only going so far in life, right?
Yep.
So I think in a lot of ways that becomes the derailment factor for a lot of very technical people. And, and here's the other interesting thing has changed in a post-COVID world. In pre-COVID, especially if you're at a big company, there were lots of places where technical people that had no people skills could hide.
Ooh, yeah.
I think in a post-COVID world where we're on interactions like this all day long, unless you are truly an individual contributor that never has to talk to anybody, it's going to be really hard to hide if you don't have decent people skills and are willing to engage and work with people. Now, that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean you're the one planning the company picnic, right? But I do think it means you've got to find ways to interact with people and frankly, also really listen to what they have going on. I also tend to think it lends itself a lot more towards flat organizations than hierarchical organizations. I mean, I think hierarchical organizations where, you've got the VP, the director, the manager, the subordinates, the team leader. I remember when I was working at IBM, it wouldn't be uncommon to have 12 levels between you and the CEO. Those days are done. They're just not going to work.
That's hard to maintain. Yeah.
Impossible. You spend all your time on internal coordination versus getting anything done.
Yeah. So I know you're a busy guy. There's a lot going on in the world. Everything is changing, feels like every day. How do you stay on top of emerging tech while also handling day to day?
That's an interesting subject, especially in the light of everything going on here in the U.S. nowadays, right? My answers change, right? I used to be a real news hound. I would start every day and end every day religiously with what's going on in the world. I hate to admit it, but I'm finding myself having to take a new tact, right? Where there's regardless of what side of the political aisle you sit on, right?
Sure.
There's just so much political junk going on right now. And that's not unique to the US, although in the US it's pretty amplified. I am having to realize that honestly, for my own mental health and sanity,
Yep.
I have to filter like I have never done before. I mean, if you asked me this a year ago, I would have said, oh, like I listen to Cyberwire every morning, watch the news, like watch the CBS news every night, and like Apple News along the way, right? And a bunch of threat feeds and stuff like that. I have had to seriously filter that because for two things, right? One, I think trusted, reliable news sources without bias are really hard to find
Hard.
now. And I think also there's just a lot of junk I don't need the barrage of all day long. Like the politics don't help me do my job. It's interesting, it's helpful to know that, but it doesn't help me to do my job. So I find myself really filtering the living daylights out of stuff, even on LinkedIn. Most of my days on LinkedIn for the last, I don't know, since LinkedIn has started, have been adding people. Most of what I'm doing now on LinkedIn is removing people to get the junk out of my feed. And I don't know if that's healthy, but I have to just kind of maintain like there's too much input. I need to root it down to the input that helps me do my job. But look, I think the biggest thing, I'm a gigantic fan of the Cyberwire. I just find that like in 10 minutes or less, I can get all the threat intel, breach data, and key movements that I need to know every day. And I listen to it religiously. And I tell my teams, I'm like, look, man, if you're going to a customer, you better, whether it's the Cyberwire or it's, the SANS daily, weekly or whatever their report is, like, you better be up to speed because if someone brings up, the latest breach or attack that occurred.
Here's the thing I'm worried about.
And here's the thing I'm worried about. And you don't know what they're talking about, then you're done.
Yeah.
Your credibility is gone.
Any leadership myths in the context of cybersecurity that you would prefer to debunk?
I don't know. I kind of feel like we're so straightforward in cybersecurity. I don't think there's a lot of myths. I mean, I think the one myth is like, the classic like crisis communications of, oh, it was a sophisticated nation state actor and blah, blah, blah. I mean, we're far enough into this, guys. It's time to call it. 90% of these breaches shouldn't have occurred. Your security posture sucked. You didn't invest in the things you needed to. And I do think there's a necessary shift. And I don't know what, CISA is going to become in the next go round here, although I really do like who they've nominated as CISA director. But, up to this point, CISA was about kind of spreading the warm hug around organizations, right? Yep. There is a point here where there's a motion of like, okay, you don't necessarily have to get all regulatory on this, but like, you got to up your game. I mean, having robust cybersecurity protections is kind of like having, fire alarms and smoke detectors in your building. Like,
gets to a point of basic hygiene. Yeah.
This is kind of basic hygiene, and I think there are some industries in particular, healthcare being a good example, where you just look around and it's like, okay, at some point, this is negligence and incompetence. If you can't pass a basic NIST, security audit, I don't know how you justify that anymore.
Yeah, that should be, ideally, it gets harder and harder to justify as we go.
Yeah, I mean, it was fair in the early days of this to say, look, this stuff's too expensive, it's too exotic. I mean, but like, if you don't have multi-factor EDR and somebody watching your security posture and, passwords that are longer than like 6 characters, we're kind of in the negligence territory.
Yeah, I think you're pretty easily there. Yeah, one of the things I found interesting kind of is the evolution of the term APT, right? It started out as, hey, this is exciting, nation state, here we go. Very quickly became, well, it's APT, so you can't possibly have expected me to detect it as your security product. Or, it almost became licensed to, oh, well, we got popped by APT. What do you expect us to do? And it's like, yeah, but because your passwords are garbage, this should not be hard.
Well, I'll tell you a funny little secret, and you're going to love this. So, at Cyberbit, we're in the business of building these cyber ranges, right? And we decided a bunch of years ago that we're going to stop building on-premise ranges and we're only going to build them in the cloud because, hey, that's where your workload is today, right? That's probably where you should practice. Well, the interesting difference when you run these exercises in the cloud is you're in a live cloud environment, right? Like the tooling in the cloud is protecting the cloud. So if you do bad things, it's probably going to detect it and it's going to shut you down. So part of the difficulty of building these live fire exercises in cloud environments is, you have to trick the cloud to let you run the malware or whatever it is you want to run, right? And of course, the stuff we run is all inoculated, right? But we just got done doing Sandworm as an example, really complex live fire. Well, in Sandworm, there's a couple of wipers and there's a 0-day. Well, we had to recreate that. The problem is you can't use the actual wipers in 0-day because the EDR tools in the sim we're using immediately detect it. It's got a signature, right? So, I mean, here's the funny part. So we go and we reverse engineer these things and we create
something by one.
We literally create a new 0-day, right? And new wipers. And they work. Now, granted, again, they're inoculated. They're only going to work in our range. Like, it's not something that's going to break free.
Yeah.
Here's the funny thing. So we're building this, and midway through the development process, I get this note. We're like, we got a problem. Like, what? The damn EDR detected it, and it's flagged us as an APT. So we're going to have to start all over again. I mean, my point in telling you this story, right? Like, we're creating fake stuff, and it detects it like that. So, because it's all working off the behavioral-based algorithms, right? So this idea that, oh, it was an APT, I couldn't detect it, it depends on what it was. Now, granted, don't get me wrong. There's some crazy stuff out there, right? But that is like the 1% of the 1%. And here's the point, right? Like, what I always love is like, oh, you're some mid-level retailer or healthcare company. No one wasted a 0-day on you. No, that's not what happened, right? And I think that's part of what we've got to look at in the posture. It's a totally different story if you're a defense contractor.
Sure.
That's where a defense contractor says, okay, this was an APT, it's highly sophisticated. Here's all the details. Okay, that's a different story. You're a local hospital and you're trying to tell me you got hit with a 0-day? I doubt it.
Not so much.
Probably not.
Do you guys have a code name from CrowdStrike yet?
No, we don't. But my God, if that ever happened, my engineers would be doing backflips.
Oh yeah, that's internal swag right there.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny you say that. I don't want to say who detected us or how they did it because we don't want to get tagged in that way, right? But this is the stuff that happens.
Absolutely. How do you define effective team culture and how do you build it?
Here's the funny thing. And again, this goes back to the interpersonal skills. Historically, I think in companies I've run, companies I've been in, you always viewed HR as, dealing with bad things that happened, payroll benefits, things like that. My HR VP would get mad at me if I called her HR. In fact, I should probably get mad at me if she listens to this. She's like, no, we're people. Mm-hmm. And I've really learned to embrace what that means, right? The amount of coaching that they do of both myself, my executives, and subordinates is mind-blowing. And it's really fascinating to me how much that career has evolved to really focusing in on performance. I mean, let me put it this way. My head of people is asking for the pipeline by region so she can go dig into who's behind and how did she dig underneath why they're not producing pipeline and what's going on. That's a whole other level. But so too is the performance you get when you use people like that. So I think that's a huge unlock.
What's the most essential quality in security leaders?
Well, we talked about communications. I would say the other thing is going back to the crisis management. I think effective security leaders think in OODA loops. And for anyone who doesn't know what an OODA loop is, it's a concept that came from a guy named Colonel John Boyd, who was an Air Force pilot that really thought about how do I articulate the decision-making process in an air-to-air combat dogfight. And, it's just a different mode of decision-making, right? And I think that what you see universally in really strong cybersecurity leaders, whether they're managing a team, whether they're doing incident response, whether they're building applications, is at some point in their career, they've exercised this type of decision-making. And I think that's just so critical. Just look around in a group of CISOs. How many of them have been in the military, law enforcement, emergency response, healthcare, any kind of those fields? And you ask people to raise their hands, it'll be 80-90% of the room.
Yeah, one of the things I've often keyed into is observing. There's the word right there. But detecting the difference between orient and observe in somebody's loop, when you can kind of see that transition of, all right, I am now oriented, I've switched over to observing. It's a win that.
I think the other big one for me is like recognizing that not making a decision is relegating the decision to the adversary, and in the importance of making decisions. Like, it's so easy in normal corporate culture to be like, yeah, we need to talk about this some more. Let's go hire a consultant. Let's gather more data. I mean, how many times have you been told in your career, Ben, like, hey, Ben, that's really interesting. Can we get some data behind this and, maybe slow down a little bit?
Man,
Cybersecurity folks are like, okay, I've got most of what I need. Let's make a decision. Let's go. Next. What? Because you're ultimately working down a queue, right? If you don't, think of it this way. If your SOC takes in a few 100,000 events a day and you're not processing through the priority events, then you're never going to have the time to come back to them. So anything you don't process, you are relegating that to somebody else, which is the bad.
Unfortunately, it's the attacker. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. So if you could go back in time, roll out the DeLorean, go back 20 years and talk to yourself, what advice would you give?
I think just about everybody that goes off to college, I studied as an electrical engineer, never spent a day doing electrical engineering because, software was really cool. And well, not to date myself, but, the internet was brand new then. So that was where the money was. Like, I mean, one of the things I really wonder about, like, and I've got kids that are now headed off to college. Like, if I was going to go to college now, what would I study? I think I'd have a lot of very interesting advice for my younger self. As much as it pains it to say it, like, I think I would have probably advised myself to spend a lot more time on the soft stuff, which I spent zero time on along the way. Whether that's the people skills or, a lot of the reading and writing that, I've like math. Oh, I'm all in. Reading, writing. Yeah, no, I don't want any of that. Right. Like, I mean, it's only when you get later in your career that you realize how critical some of that stuff is. And, of course, the other thing that's bizarre now, like, is you really have to look at every career now in the light of how does AI disrupt this? I think there's, my daughter's studying to be a lawyer. And, we've had long conversations about, look, there's parts of the law that I think are going to become completely circumvented by an AI machine. And there's other parts of the law that are going to get really interesting. You need to pick wisely as you decide what you want to do.
Yeah. I mean, I've often said, I think, the copyright questions of generative AI, we've got another 10 years before we have, firm answers on that stuff.
On the other hand, like, think of how you use a lawyer in the real estate process, contract, like, that's done. That is just so done.
Yeah, but then you've got the cases that go before the judge with the briefings containing citations that are completely made up.
Yeah.
They just happen to fit the pattern, and it's like,
yep. Yeah. Now imagine how that is for that judge, right? Where they're going to be able to take all these briefs, run through an AI agent, get their own point of view on what the lawyers have submitted. Like, I mean, it gets really interesting really quick.
Yeah, you start to wonder where the biases fall in, and
it could hopefully be able to weed those out pretty quickly.
Hopefully. What's your approach to mentoring the next generation?
Look, once you reach any level of seniority in your career, mentoring is critical because you got to create your own pipeline of future leaders. I think if you plan on building a company where you buy every position versus build them, you're not going to be successful. It's going to cost you way too much money and take way too long to go build the company that you want to build. Like, you're going to have to mentor some people in. And I think, look, a lot of the mentoring dialogue is both the positive side of, hey, here's what you're doing right. Here's what you want to chase next. Here's what you want to think about. And really trying to get underneath that person's aspirations, right? Like, there's a lot you can do with someone with aspirations. It's always difficult if someone doesn't aspire to go to the next step. On the other hand, I think mentoring to the negative is important too, right? Like, there are plenty of people out there that have derailment factors that with the right coaching and mentoring can fix those derailment factors. And again, it's back to the point that it's a whole lot more effective if you can work that than if you're constantly replacing those people. I mean, think of it this way. Just to use round numbers, let's say you're going out and you're hiring SOC operators, and SOC operators are paid more than this, but let's just say for argument's sake, they make $100,000 a year, right? You're paying a third of that to recruit them. So that's $33,000 a year. You get in the wrong person, or they have a derailment factor that you don't fix. It takes you 6 months to realize it. You then let them go. That takes another 3 months. And it took you 3 months to recruit them to begin with. So you're a year into this process. You spend $133,000, probably another $33,000 to get rid of them. So $166,000.
Right.
Where in reality, if you had just caught that issue either A, in the interview process and maybe not hired to begin with,
Yep.
or caught it early enough with the right mentoring that you course corrected it, you'd save yourself a ton of money and a ton of time. And that's the thing people forget is they forget about the cost of replacing people versus just turning people over.
What characteristics do you look for when you're, searching for that diamond in the rough?
Well, I mean, things are a lot different now that I'm leading a smaller company. At a small company, I think this is going to sound really ridiculous, but on the top of the list is they better be a team player and no a-hole factor, right? Like it's just not worth it. You've just got to. There's a lot of highly successful people that cannot work as part of a small team, and I think that's the single biggest thing you've got to weed out. Once you get past that, I really like to find people that are mission oriented. Like, look, we're a small company. We've got some tough competition. We've got a great product. But man, there's going to be some tough days. There's going to be some tough quarters. So you better be all in for the mission, or there's going to be a Tuesday where you're like, oh, this is just too hard. And if you're not really after that success factor, know what it is and want to work together as a team, then it's not the right place for you, right? So that's probably one of the biggest things. The other thing I do now is, I'm all about very experiential interviews, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we recently hired a CMO and I put that person through a full analysis, right? Of what are you doing? When are you doing it? What's your first 100 days look like? All that kind of stuff, right? Along the same front, people use our product. Like you're going and hire someone that says they've got 10 years of Splunk experience. All right, let's go find out. Like I'll put them into an exercise. I'll remove all the hints and tips and, make it an easy exercise that anybody who's used Splunk before should be able to ace. I'm making up a number here, but I would say there's at least a 30% fail rate when we do that for customers. Then think about that for a second. These are people that you've gone all the way through the interviewing process. Mm-hmm. So for all intents and purposes, the interviewing process has failed. The recruiting process has failed.
Yeah.
They have purported to have a very specific skill, and it's about a 30% failure rate. That's a real problem. But again, if I can weed that out before I hire that person, that's saving a ton of time and money.
How do you detect that focus on mission?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. You kind of figure it out. Like, I think a lot of it's getting underneath somebody's aspirations and really understanding what do they want to do. The other thing, this sounds super cheesy, but you can tell a lot by asking somebody to look at your website, look at your materials out there, and give me your view. Now, you got to realize that they've got limited information. They're not going to kind of spit back to you the next sales plan or marketing plan or whatever, but you can kind of tell right away whether they're into it or whether it's just another job posting on LinkedIn that they applied to. The risk in that is a lot of people try to go hire people from their competitors. I think that's a huge mistake. I really try to stay away from hiring competitive because if you're looking to leave company A, why are you not going to leave B? Like, unless you think your competitors really have problems and it's a unique situation, like you really got to ask. You really got to kind of double click anytime you're trying to do a competitive hire.
Can you articulate why the grass is greener?
Yeah.
Versus it's
or it could be some sort of derailment issue. Like there are plenty of times where a new investor swept in or there was a management change and they brought in their own people. Like, okay, I get that. That actually could be interesting. But, like you see the salesperson that wasn't successful at company A coming to apply to you.
Yeah. So I have found myself focusing more on kind of the soft qualities than necessarily skill. Does that align with what you're thinking or?
Well, I think they're both important, right?
Yeah.
I'll throw a new word out there. Like, I think we've talked about the skills gap in cybersecurity, probably too long. I think what we really have is an experience gap. If you look at most of the job postings out there, the 400,000 plus open unfilled cybersecurity jobs in the US,
yeah,
the vast majority of them are entry level. But then you go and read the descriptions,
It's not
And
an
they
entry level description.
well, it's an early description. It's like, hey, looking for a level 1 SOC operator, but here's where it goes awry. The description says, would be great if they had, experience with Palo Alto and CrowdStrike.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a very reasonable ask. Here's the problem. When that gets handed over to a recruiter, the recruiter looks at it, doesn't understand any of the technical jargon, and they look at it and go, okay, there's not much to work with here other than CrowdStrike and Palo Alto. So how do they write their search? They write their search looking for CrowdStrike and Palo Alto. So here's the bad news. If you didn't mention those two products, your resume is not even coming up in the
Human beings not
way.
even see it. Yeah.
Nope. And I think this is the single biggest issue where, you got to figure in the United States, we're putting out somewhere between 20 and 30,000 information security professionals a year, but they're not getting the jobs they want. They're getting hired, but they're not getting hired into the SOC as an example, right? They're getting hired into like some sort of early project management job or something like that. This is the gap, right? The gap is that they didn't have the experience with commercial tools in college. They don't put it on the resume and they get filtered out initially. We got to fix that.
I've been a fan recently thinking about things in my own life and people I'm connected to that, it would be nice to see more apprenticeships and kind of hands-on experience built into the process.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've got a lot of bias to this. I went to RIT, which is one of the world's largest co-op schools. So my engineering degree was 5 years because you were going to work for a year of that. So I did 5 co-ops. But now these companies don't mean much today. They meant a lot then. But I mean, I co-op for IBM, Motorola, and Eastman Kodak while still in college and made a ton of money at the time doing it, right? Like, I so firmly believe in that when I got here, we started instituting a much more robust program because, the thing people forget is that it's about finding and recruiting new talent. It's also about bringing in talent that can do the job that costs a fraction of what hiring somebody with 20 years of experience costs. So there's a cost factor there.
Mm-hmm.
But the third thing about it is that the reality is you need access to younger brains. You need access to the innovation. I mean, the older we get, the more the innovation curve drops, right? So look, I'm in a business where I tell people this all the time. I'm in a business where we train the tip of the spear SOC operators. Well, 10 years ago, those people were 35 and 40 years old. Now what's happened is all these SOCs have been offshored to India, Costa Rica, Northern Ireland. The average age in a SOC now is like 25. The way a 25-year-old learns, the things they care about, is totally different than a 45-year-old, right? So if we don't understand that language, we're going to be tone deaf. And, it was funny. I was having this argument with my development team last week. Like, we were looking at some UI elements and they look great to me, but I'm like, go run those by some 25-year-olds. Oh, that conversation didn't go well because 25-year-olds are like, yeah, this looks like Boomer Town. This is old, dated.
2005 called.
And yeah, exactly. 2005 called. They want their UI back. And, we had to radically change it. But that's what you got to do. And when you have that kind of talent on board, you significantly reduce the risk that you're going to get off.
So on your trip up the ladder, what would you say the hardest transition, the hardest step you faced was?
Oh, that's easy. The first executive level job. And like, I was at IBM at the time. The difference between a line employee and an executive in a place like IBM is night and day. I mean, that's where you're owning a business. In my case, this sounds ridiculous nowadays when you think about this in the realm of, startups and things. But my first business at IBM was like, I don't know, 250, 300 million in ARR. Like, that's the first thing you're doing. And all the responsibility that goes with that, like, that's a gigantic shift. And you move from being a player to being a player coach to just being a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And for a technical person, that's a really, really hard pivot to make.
That's a hard step.
That's a very hard step when you not only are no longer the smartest person in the room, but you by design don't want to be. You want to be the one listening to everybody in the room, orchestrating what's going to happen, dealing with those derailments. Like, that's a totally different motion. But, in the end, it ended up being a really fun motion.
All right. Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for today. Before we wrap up, if people want to follow along with your work, what's the best place to go?
Cyberbit.com or LinkedIn, right? I mean, everything nowadays is out on social media, so it's pretty easy to follow what we're up to.
Sounds good. Caleb, thanks for the amazing conversation. Always a pleasure. And
all right. Well, thanks a lot, Ben. It's great seeing you.